You know, one of the things that old guys like myself tend to say is nobody makes their own stuff anymore. Nobody's into that DIY spirit. It's kind of a Gen X and earlier thing to just want to do things on your own. That's the kind of the prevailing wisdom. I don't necessarily think it's true. I think it's that younger folks are into DIY in a whole different way that us olds just don't understand. Want to know what I'm talking about? Let's go. Welcome to the Middle-Aged Hack Channel. I am Stuart. I am your middle-aged hack, just a child of the 80s trying to make his way through the 20s, and I am so glad that you are taking the journey with me. This time I'm talking about retro gaming again. You can find a bunch of videos about retro gaming on my channel because I've been into retro gaming for about a year and a half now, and it's something that really interests me. Going back to my younger days and experiencing those arcade games and consoles that I remember so well and miss so much is just one of the ways that I decompress. I retro game mostly with a computer that I kind of repurposed for retro gaming. I also use a handheld, and I've done videos on that before, but it was a lot of fun to put together that retro rig. And I want to talk to you about why somebody would do that as opposed to buying a console. You see, whether it's a handheld or something that plugs into your television, either in a stick format or in a console box format, you can go on AliExpress and for under 50 bucks, you can get something that will very reliably play everything up to PS1, including a lot of arcade games. So you could do that, and then it'll come and it'll work, and you're in business. And you know, if you're new to retro gaming, maybe you want to do that. Maybe that's just kind of your entree into it. But I think that part of the fun of retro gaming is building it all yourself. There are folks who really restore arcade cabinets or mod them so that they can work with multiple games. I'm not at that point yet, but on the other hand, I am at the point of kind of building retro rigs a little bit, and having done a couple of them, I have an idea of why I like to do them and what kind of makes the best sense. Retro gaming can be done on almost any hardware. If you have an old PC or Intel-based Mac sitting around, it's going to do great for retro gaming. If it was made in the 2010s, that's pretty much all you need. Anything, 7 to 8 years old is going to do it. I suppose anything before like 2015 probably wouldn't get, really great when it comes to the later games, but pretty much any retro rig is going to do that because you're emulating something from 40 years ago. You don't need a huge amount of computing power. Not terribly surprising there. So it's a great thing to do with an old computer rather than recycling it. A lot of us are hesitant to recycle our old electronics because we don't really believe that our personal information can be effectively wiped off those devices without just 100% shredding them, which is bad for the environment and makes them less recyclable, and that has a lot of problems themselves, especially if you don't personally watch your electronics get shredded, so you have to take somebody else's word for it. So if you've got an old computer sitting around, turn it into a retro gaming rig. I personally recommend a build of Linux called Batocera, and you can find that all over the place. There's tutorials on how to install it. You can install it on a flash drive. It's just that stable, and you plug it in so that you could actually have a machine that dual boots Windows, and when you just decide to boot from the flash drive, it will be your retro gaming rig. Super flexible. Batocera can be skinned and themed and customized any way you want. It's technically open source. You can download the source code and make your own changes to it, and some people have done that. So there's a lot of fun that you can have just customizing that. Or if you want an easy solution that will turn your old computer into something usable, then Batocera is going to do that for you. If you're up for a bit more of a challenge, you can pick up a Raspberry Pi. Now, you may have heard the term Raspberry Pi, and you may not know what it is. A Raspberry Pi, very simply, is a small computer that sits on a single circuit board, is very inexpensive to buy, and is able to run Linux so that it could run retro gaming rigs or just about anything else that you want to do with it. The whole point is that it's so inexpensive that you really don't care what you're going to do with it. It's not designed to be an office PC kind of thing, but on the other hand, it's a great way to have your own special projects. You can get a build of Batocera that is designed for Raspberry Pi, or you can put any version of Linux on it and you can build anything you want. Looking at all of this is, I mean, it's just fun. It doesn't seem like, if you're the kind of person who thinks that fighting with a computer couldn't possibly seem like fun, it is, because of the sense of accomplishment you will get when that retro gaming rig works for you. And really all you need is something like Batocera, or an old computer, or a Raspberry Pi, and ROMs and BIOS, which I'll talk about in a minute. Last thing I want to do before I do talk about the ROMs and BIOS issue is mention that you don't even need to special purpose a computer. If you have an Intel Mac or a Windows PC or an iPhone or an Android or an Apple TV, and I think there are a couple of other things, you can run software called RetroArch on it. It's just an app that runs and lets you retro game. It's a little bit it lets you preserve the rest of the computer as completely untouched and just dive into retro gaming whenever you want. It's not going to be as polished of a solution as using something like a standalone like Batocera Linux, but on the other hand, it is going to let you switch back and forth, and depending on what you do for a living, that might be something that you're kind of interested in doing all day. Now for the discussion that I really want to have. If you're talking about retro gaming, there's always going to be a discussion to be had around copyright. Legally in this country, copyright extends for 75 years. So if you're talking about all the video games you grew up with, everything from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and beyond, it is all still copyrighted. The code that is used as, to tell the simulators what to do, this is called the BIOS. The code for the games themselves, these are called the ROMs. This is all copyrighted stuff. And you have to decide for yourself how comfortable you are using this copyrighted stuff, and what you would do if you got hit with a massive copyright kind of takedown or something like that. Because it could potentially happen. Nintendo especially is going around and issuing these takedown notices to a lot of hardware manufacturers. They haven't bothered the DIYers yet, but what they have been doing is finding the repositories of these BIOS and ROM files and making them get taken down. So if you don't have something already, that it might be harder to find. I have to say, because this is a public YouTube video and, I want to be very careful with my words, I think that copyright reform is desperately needed for this kind of thing, because realistically, nobody is profiting that much off of a lot of this hardware. It's not being resurrected. It's not being turned into saleable items, even though it could. And even when it is, most of this stuff has been sold over and over again. The intellectual property no longer belongs to the people who created it. So you're not funding the original creators of these games. Legally, you're funding whoever owns the copyright, which is the way that all works. And you have to decide for yourself how comfortable you are with that and what that means to you and whether or not you think it's harmless. As I said myself, I'm being very careful because this is a public YouTube video. Bottom line here, folks, is if you want a fun challenge, one that doesn't cost a lot to do, and one that is very easy to get done, and you feel a real sense of accomplishment, and there's a lot of YouTubes and stuff like that telling you how to do it, build your own retro gaming rig. It's a lot of fun. It'll take you back to your younger days. It'll sharpen those problem-solving skills, which are always great to have, and who knows, it might open up a whole new hobby for you. Anyway, that's it for me, the Middle-Aged Hack. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I'm just going to say like, subscribe, share, leave a comment. I know some people kind of think it's hacky when you mention that stuff, but it's just part of me being grateful for you making it all the way to the end of this video. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time on the Middle-Aged Hack channel.